Imagine a history book, not made of paper, but of brass and carved ivory. Thousands of plaques and sculptures, each one recording a king, a battle, a ceremony, the whole memory of a great African kingdom cast in metal across centuries. It was one of the finest bodies of art the world had ever produced, and it was safe in the royal palace where it belonged. At least, it was, because in a single week in 1897, foreign soldiers carried almost all of it away, and most of it has never come home. To feel what was lost, you first have to understand what these objects were. The Kingdom of Benin sat in what is now southern Nigeria. Be careful with the name, because it is not the modern country called Benin next door. This was a separate, older power, the Kingdom of the Edo people, ruled by a king they called the Oba. For hundreds of years, it was one of the most organized and powerful states in West Africa, and the kingdom itself was a wonder long before you get to the art. Benin City was protected by enormous earthworks, walls and ditches dug by hand that stretched for thousands of miles in total across the wider kingdom, among the largest earthworks ever built by human beings anywhere. The city had broad avenues, a great royal palace, and a society organized into guilds of specialists. Early European visitors who saw it described a place as orderly and grand as the cities they had left behind. This was no small chiefdom. It was a capital of real power, and the craftsmen of that capital made marvels. Working in brass, they used a method called lost wax casting, sculpting a form in wax, covering it in clay, melting the wax away, pouring molten metal into the empty space. With it, they cast hundreds of detailed plaques showing the life of the court. Kings in coral regalia, warriors with shields and spears, musicians, leopards, messengers, scenes of ceremony and power. They carved ivory into masks of breathtaking delicacy, like the famous mask of Queen Idia, a face so fine it is now a symbol of African art itself. This was not mere decoration, it was a record. The plaques hung in the palace and preserved the deeds of one Oba after another, generation by generation. A nation was writing its own history, in metal and tusk, keeping its kings and its triumphs alive in a form that could outlast any memory. Hold that picture in your mind, because what happened next is the betrayal. In early 1897, a British official led a party toward Benin City. He had been warned to stay away, told that the Oba was deep in sacred rites and could not receive outsiders just then. He went anyway. The party was attacked on the road and most of them were killed. It was a disaster, and for the British, it was also an opportunity. They had their excuse. What came next was called a punitive expedition. About 1,200 British troops marched on the kingdom, armed with modern rifles and machine guns. They fought their way to the capital, and then they took it. They burned Benin City. They drove the Oba, a king named Ovenramwen, from his throne and sent him into exile, where he died. A kingdom that had stood for centuries fell in a matter of days. If a story like this is one you think more people should hear, take a moment now and subscribe to Okra. First chapter of African history is full of things that were taken and renamed and hidden, and we are going to keep finding them. And stay close, because what happened to the bronzes after the looting is its own kind of insult. The soldiers emptied the royal palace of its treasures, room by room. When they were done, around 5,000 objects had been carried off. Plaques, sculptures, ivories, regalia, the accumulated memory of an entire civilization, loaded onto ships and sent to Europe. And here is the cold part. Much of it was sold deliberately on purpose to pay for the cost of the very expedition that had stolen it. Officers were allowed to keep pieces as personal profit. A kingdom's history was broken up and auctioned off like spoils of war. When the bronzes reached Europe, they caused a sensation. The art was so fine, so technically masterful, many Europeans simply refused to believe Africans had made it. Scholars invented theories that the bronzes must have been taught by ancient Egyptians, or by the Portuguese, or by some lost wandering European hand. Anyone in their minds, but the West African kingdom that had actually cast them. The theft was followed by a second erasure, the erasure of the makers themselves. The genius of Benin was stolen, and then it was denied. The objects scattered across the world. Today, the Benin bronzes are spread across at least 165 museums, plus countless private collections in cities all over the globe. The British Museum in London alone holds more than 900 of them, the single largest collection on Earth, none of it made anywhere near London. For more than a century, to see the history of Benin, you had to travel to the countries that took it. But the story is not finished. This is where it turns. In recent years, the pressure to return the bronzes has grown impossible to ignore. Nigeria has asked for them back again and again, and some have finally begun to listen. In 2022, Germany transferred ownership of over 1,100 Benin bronzes to Nigeria, the largest single return of African art in history. Smaller institutions have followed. A museum in London called the Horniman agreed to return its bronzes. Universities in Britain and beyond have begun to send pieces home, one collection at a time. And yet, the largest holders have been the slowest to move. Britain, where the looting was planned and carried out, still keeps the bulk of its bronzes. A law called the British Museum Act makes it very hard for the National Museum to give major objects away, and so most of the 900 in the British Museum remain on foreign shelves, behind foreign glass, far from the palace they were cut from. The fight is real, and it is ongoing right now. Nigeria has even built new museum space in Benin City to receive the bronzes whenever they are allowed to come home. Think about what that homecoming actually means. This is not about a few pretty objects in display cases. It is about whether a people get to hold their own history in their own hands. The Benin bronzes are not trophies. They are the Edo nation's record of itself, its kings and its memory and its art. To keep them is to keep that memory locked away. To return them is to give a people back the right to tell their own story in their own city, to their own children. There is a deep irony in how these objects are described today. In the museums that hold them, they are presented as treasures of world culture, displayed with pride, drawing crowds and admiration. The very institutions that benefit from the looting now frame themselves as the careful guardians of African heritage. But you cannot guard what you took by force. The bronzes were never theirs to protect. They were safe in the palace, where they belonged, until the day someone decided that an entire kingdom's history could be carried off as payment for the cost of stealing it. To understand the loss, picture some of the actual pieces. There is the ivory mask of Queen Idia, carved with such delicacy that it has become one of the most recognized works of African art in the world. There are brass heads of the Obas, dignified and serene, made to honor dead kings. There are the great rectangular plaques, hundreds of them, that once covered the wooden pillars of the palace, each a frozen scene of court life. Together they formed a gallery of a kingdom's soul. To scatter them across 165 museums is to tear the pages out of a single book and deal them around the world like playing cards. The people who want to keep the bronzes make their arguments. They say the objects are now part of world heritage, that they are seen by millions, that they are safe and well studied where they are. But strip those arguments down, and a hard question remains. Can a thing taken by force in a burning city ever truly belong to the people who took it? The plaques were not gifts. They were not sold by a willing hand. They were carried out of a looted palace. No amount of careful display changes how they left. Nigeria has not just asked for the bronzes back. It has prepared to receive them. Plans have advanced for a major new museum in Benin City, built to hold and honor the returning art in the place where it was made, and the returns have begun to come. Beyond Germany's huge handover, smaller institutions have acted, sending heads and plaques and regalia home one shipment at a time. Each arrival is a small homecoming, watched by crowds, a piece of a kingdom's memory finally setting foot on its own soil again. Underneath all the history, this is a simple principle. Things taken by force should go back to the people they were taken from, when those people ask for them and can care for them. That is not radical. It is how any of us would expect to be treated. The only reason it has taken more than a century to act on with the Benin bronzes is that the takers powerful and the taken were not. That balance is finally slowly beginning to shift. The good news is that the tide has truly begun to turn. Each return, each crate sent home to Nigeria closes a little of the wound. The history book that was scattered across the world is slowly, piece by piece, being put back together. And every time a bronze comes home, it carries more than metal. It carries an admission, long overdue, it should never have left. The momentum is real, and it has names. A college at Cambridge returned a bronze cockerel, the Okukor, that had sat in its dining hall for decades. A university in Scotland sent back a sculpted head. Museums across the United States have begun transferring pieces. Each return chips away at the wall, and each one makes the holdouts look more alone. But the British Museum remains the great holdout, and its reasons are as much legal as moral. A law passed in 1963 makes it very hard for the museum to permanently give away objects in its collection, even ones it might wish to return. So the institution that holds the largest hoard of Benin bronzes on Earth is, in a sense, locked into keeping them by its own country's rules. Changing that would take a political will that has not yet arrived. Public opinion has been shifting underneath all of this. A generation ago, the idea of emptying a famous museum's cases to send art back to Africa was treated as unthinkable in much of Europe. Today, it is a mainstream debate, argued in newspapers and parliaments, with growing numbers on the side of return. The bronzes have become a symbol far larger than themselves, a test of whether the old empires will finally reckon with what they took. And it is not only Benin. Across Africa, countless objects sit in foreign museums, carried off during the colonial age. Sacred items, royal regalia, human remains, cultural memory of dozens of peoples. The Benin bronzes are the most famous case, but they are part of a much larger reckoning over who holds the heritage of a continent and whether they will give it back. For the people of Benin City, this is not an abstract debate about law and museums. It is personal. These are the faces of their own kings, the records of their own ancestors, made by the hands of their own forebears. To see them behind glass in a foreign capital, labeled and admired by strangers, is to be reminded daily of a wound that was never closed. Every bronze that comes home helps close it a little more. The question now is not whether the Benin bronzes belong in Benin. They were made there, for there, by the people of there. The only real question left is how long the last holders will keep pretending otherwise. If you want to keep following the things they took, truths they tried to bury, ochre is just getting started. I will see you in the next one.